Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone.
Authorities in Marion County, Florida say that an accused car thief made quite the interesting decision recently after he allegedly stole a vehicle belonging to a local woman, then called her to tell her what he had done. According to reports, the crime took place sometime recently when Marion County police received a call from a woman in the city of Ocala. The woman explained that she had just had her car stolen, but that weirdly afterwards the suspected perpetrator, 32-year-old Marquise Nance, had phoned her to tell her about the crime. Specifically, he said that he had left the vehicle at a Winn-Dixie supermarket at the local Marion Oaks shopping center. When officers responded to the scene, they found the woman's stolen car along with Nance. Apparently, he was in a less honest mood at this point because when questioned about the situation, he claimed that he hadn't stolen anything. Luckily, police were able to recover surveillance video from the area that showed him driving and exiting the vehicle. Nance was arrested and is now facing multiple charges, including grand theft of a motor vehicle. In a recent video posted by the Marion County Sheriff's Office, one of their officers, Lieutenant Paul Bloom, joked that it was kind of Nance that he told the victim he had stolen her car.
The family of a 29-year-old New York woman had been left stunned and devastated this week after she was brutally murdered just steps from the front door of their apartment building, and she used her dying breaths to identify her alleged killer. The whole thing began just before 5:30 a.m. on May 20th, when the victim, 29-year-old Shirley Rodriguez, left the apartment where she lived with her older sister and her parents in Manhattan's Washington Park neighborhood. She was on her way to her job as a lab technician and had ordered an Uber to take her to work, when suddenly, just moments after stepping outside, she was attacked. The male perpetrator was dressed in black and had been hiding just out of sight behind a parked car. As soon as Shirley headed towards her Uber, he jumped out and began stabbing and slashing at her with a knife. Despite fighting as hard as she could, Shirley's attacker was vicious and persistent. During the struggle, which reportedly lasted for more than a minute, she was stabbed in the torso, back, neck, arms, and face. Shirley's terrified Uber driver called 911, while two bystanders soon attempted to intervene. When they did, the attacker began running away and ultimately managed to escape. Despite her devastating injuries, Shirley was able to get back to the lobby of the apartment building, where she used the intercom to call for help from her family. They ran downstairs immediately, horrified by the 29-year-old's screams. Sadly, there was nothing they could do, though they were able to hear Shirley's dying words. She reportedly told them, quote, "Ty did this." It was apparently obvious which Ty she was referring to. It was her ex-boyfriend, 33-year-old Taekwon Jamaat. Heartbreakingly, Shirley was pronounced dead not long after. According to the 29-year-old's family, she and Jamaat had been in a 2-year-long relationship that had ended about a week prior. Shirley had apparently broken things off in part because Jamaat refused to give her space and repeatedly violated personal boundaries that she tried to set while they were dating. The family told police that Jamaat had only gotten worse when Shirley ended things between them. Though he wasn't outright threatening, he refused to leave her alone and continued to reach out to her non-stop through text and other messages. In an interview after the terrible crime, Shirley's sister said that one of the things that was so devastating about the situation was that she and her parents had welcomed Jamaat into their family. She said that they'd had him around for a number of holidays, and he had even come to Shirley's grandfather's funeral. Jamaat was arrested a few hours after the killing while allegedly hiding out at his uncle's house in the Bronx. He has now been charged with murder and possession of a weapon.
Authorities in the city of Dothan, Alabama say that a couple have been tracked down and arrested this week, days after a local man was found dead under his own home, and the pair were accused of his murder. According to reports, the situation began sometime on May 8th when police in Dothan received a request for a welfare check on a 54-year-old man named Patrick Parrish. Patrick hadn't been heard from by friends or family for at least a week, so they asked if police would make a trip out to his home on the 1300 block of Codary Road to see if he was okay. Not long after arriving at the property that day, officers noticed a foul odor hanging around in the vicinity. They tried knocking at the front door of the address repeatedly, however, there was no answer. A short time later, while walking around outside a little more, they made an awful discovery. Patrick's body had been concealed underneath his house. So far, police haven't released the 54-year-old's cause of death, though they have said based on the circumstances and placement of the remains, it was clear that he had been murdered. After launching an investigation, police determined that Patrick's truck was missing from his property. They also learned that he had last been seen with a man and woman, identified as 33-year-old Courtney Ingram and 31-year-old Richard Bishop Jr. Interestingly, the pair was apparently seen traveling in Patrick's truck. Arrest warrants were put out for Ingram and Bishop, who were eventually tracked down along with Patrick's missing truck on May 18th. The couple were arrested and are each now facing a charge of murder. At the time of this recording, many questions still remain about the case. The circumstances and motive behind the crime have not been released, and it's not even clear how or whether Patrick knew the two suspects. The situation is still developing.
Authorities in Floyd County, Georgia say that a 26-year-old man is facing numerous charges this week following a disturbing incident in which he allegedly set fire to his family's trailer, killing his stepmother, who was trapped inside. The incident began sometime late on May 25th when emergency responders were called about a fire at a trailer property on Addington Court in the city of Rome. Authorities arrived to find the dwelling in question completely engulfed in flames. Fire was pouring out of the roof and was also blocking the front and back doors of the dwelling, preventing firefighters from making it inside. Police quickly spoke with two of the residents of the trailer, later identified as father and son, 55-year-old Edward Larry and 26-year-old Timothy Edward Larry. They both confirmed that one person was still inside the residence, who they identified as being Edward's wife and Timothy's stepmother. They also both told officers something else. Timothy was the one who had started the fire. According to Edward, he, his 70-year-old wife, and Timothy lived in the trailer, which belonged to his former partner, Timothy's biological mother. She rented the property to them, but Timothy reportedly felt like he should be the one in charge of it. Specifically, he tried to convince his mother to sell the lot of land the trailer was on and give him the money. After failing to convince his mother to do this, Edward said that Timothy became angry. At first, he threatened to burn down the trailer when Edward and the stepmother were at work, though at some point he apparently changed his mind. Instead, he had allegedly taken a bunch of papers into his room, lit them on fire, and thrown them onto a mattress while all of them were home. While Edward and Timothy had been able to escape, the 70-year-old stepmother, whose name has so far not been released, was not. Edward said that as they ran for safety, he thought that she was right behind him, though he now believed she may have gone back to try and save their cat and two dogs. By the time he realized this, the fire had gotten wildly out of control. Firefighters eventually extinguished the blaze, though sadly, by the time they did, it was too late for the 70-year-old woman and the three pets. Their bodies were recovered from the wreckage a short time later. When questioned, Timothy reportedly backed up most of what his father had said about the incident. Even more disturbingly, while he was being driven away from the scene following his arrest, the 26-year-old reportedly looked back at the burned-out trailer and said, quote, "Yeah, let him get your ashes." Timothy Larry is now facing a number of charges in connection with the crime, including murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, 3 counts of cruelty to animals, 3 counts of arson, neglect to a disabled adult or elderly person, and criminal damage to property.
A 31-year-old Florida man may not be much of a criminal mastermind, but he might want to look into a career as a contortionist, after he recently amazed police by managing to squeeze himself into a tiny space inside a household appliance in a desperate bid to avoid arrest. According to reports, the whole thing started on May 17th when Escambia County Police received a tip about the location of 31-year-old David Jerome Jackson. Jackson was wanted on charges of firing a gun into a dwelling, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, damage to property, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, for an incident that happened 2 months earlier. After learning that Jackson might be at a home on Edgewater Drive in the city of Pensacola, officers arrived at the property to have a look around. Initially, it looked like the tip had been a bust. That was until police went into the home's laundry room. There, tightly nestled in the drum of a front-loading dryer, was the fugitive 31-year-old. To say that the situation both baffled and amused police is definitely an understatement. They had no idea how Jackson had managed to make his way inside the appliance, referring to the opening as, quote, remarkably small. Nonetheless, the 31-year-old was removed, albeit with considerable help, and taken into custody. In a post released by the sheriff's office after the incident, they joked about what they referred to as Jackson's, quote, tumble-ready hideout. They also reminded the public that all suspects are presumed innocent and, quote, free of static cling until proven otherwise in a court of law.
Authorities in Orange County, California have released unsettling new details in an ongoing murder investigation this week, days after a UPS delivery driver was brutally gunned down while in the middle of his delivery route. The case began at around 3 p.m. on May 16th, when police in the city of Irvine responded to a call about multiple shots being fired. They arrived to find 50-year-old Expedito de Leon, a UPS worker who was suffering from numerous gunshot wounds. The father of two was slumped over in the driver's seat of his delivery truck and was completely unresponsive. Not long after, he was pronounced dead. While this was more or less all that was known about the brutal broad daylight crime at the time that reports were first released, police made a horrifying announcement just a few days later. They now alleged that the person responsible was a fellow UPS co-worker of Expedito's, who is also said to be a childhood friend. According to police, that suspect, 46-year-old Rian Fontanoza, carried out the terrifying daylight ambush by tracking the victim's delivery route. At around 12:30 p.m. on the day of the shooting, he allegedly stopped another driver and asked about the route, and upon being told that Expedito was somewhere else, traveled to a nearby UPS substation. Once there, he was reportedly witnessed using company computers to look up the information and was seen taking pictures with his cell phone. After this, Fontanoza used what he had learned to find Expedito, driving there in a new vehicle that his friend wouldn't recognize. He allegedly waited for the 50-year-old to complete one final delivery before pulling up alongside him and opening fire. Expedito barely had time to buckle his seatbelt before he was shot 14 times in less than 20 seconds. Fontanoza fled the scene, though he was found by police later that afternoon. He reportedly refused to leave his vehicle, but was taken into custody after tear gas and a police canine were deployed. Unfortunately, at the time of this recording, the why behind the crime still appears to be a total mystery. The only additional detail released about Fontanoza is that he was on disability leave at the time of the shooting, but was expected to return to work on June 1st. The 46-year-old has now been charged with a special circumstances allegation of shooting from a vehicle, as well as murder by lying in wait.
Authorities in Chickasha, Oklahoma say that a 22-year-old man is facing murder charges this week after he allegedly shot and killed his parents and sister in a horrifying ambush attack during what was supposed to be a family pizza night. The situation came to light just before 11:30 a.m. on May 11th when Chickasha police were called about a potential shooting at an address near 6th Street and Washington Avenue. A 911 caller told them they had found shell casings on the front porch of the residence and they believed that more than one person might have been shot inside. When officers arrived at the scene, they quickly confirmed the horrifying situation. As they entered the house, they discovered more shell casings and a rifle, followed by the bodies of 3 people. They were later identified as husband and wife, 55-year-old James and 54-year-old Patty Mayhew, as well as their 28-year-old daughter, Shayla Mayhew. There was one person notably absent from the property, though, James and Patty's 22-year-old son, Jacob Mayhew. The investigation turned towards Jacob after police looked up the serial number of the rifle at the crime scene and discovered that it had been purchased by the 22-year-old on April 25th. They also learned that Jacob lived at a nearby residence, but both he and the GMC Yukon that he usually drove were missing. A search was launched for the 22-year-old, one that came to an end 3 days later when he was found in the Bricktown neighborhood of Oklahoma City. He was reportedly found sitting on a bench outside of a local business and was immediately taken into custody. Following his arrest, Jacob allegedly confessed to shooting and killing his parents and sister, and also admitted to planning, quote, other acts of violence. However, what these acts were and his motive behind the brutal killings still remain a mystery at the time of this recording. What has been revealed is that Jacob Mayhew allegedly killed his family during what was supposed to be a family pizza night. The afternoon before the bodies were discovered, he was reportedly hanging out at his girlfriend's apartment and told her when he left around 4:40 p.m. that he was heading to his parents' house to eat pizza. At 5:22 p.m., Jacob received a text message from his mother informing him that dinner was ready. It's believed that the shooting took place just minutes later, as when police went to the home the following day, they found the uneaten pizza on the kitchen counter. The situation is still under investigation.
Authorities in the city of Surprise, Arizona say that a mother and her infant son are lucky to be alive this week after they were subjected to a nightmarish domestic violence incident inside the woman's childhood home. According to reports, the disturbing situation began recently when the female victim, identified only by the name Allie, decided that she needed to get her and her 7-month-old son Jackson away from her abusive boyfriend, 51-year-old Todd Christopher Marchetti. Allie moved temporarily back in with her parents at their address near 168th Avenue and Jenin Drive, and for a while things seemed to be going well. However, what Allie didn't know was that Marchetti was stalking them. After waiting until Allie's parents went away for the weekend, Marchetti allegedly broke into the house through a window at around 3 a.m. on May 17th. He was reportedly armed with an axe, machete, and other weapons, and had also brought along tape, rope, and several pairs of pliers. He had apparently intended to use these supplies to spend the next couple of days maiming and then ultimately killing Allie and their son. For the next several hours, Marchetti put the mother and infant through a harrowing ordeal as Allie desperately tried to come up with some sort of plan to get her and Jackson to safety. At first, she managed to convince the 51-year-old to let her take her dog to a vet because he had shot the animal after forcing his way inside. Unfortunately, it appears that Marchetti was able to maintain control of the situation during this time and gave the vet a fake name and phone number before telling them the dog was a stray and had been hit by a car. He then left, and sadly the dog had to be euthanized. Miraculously, Allie was eventually able to create a second opportunity for escape when she convinced Marchetti to allow her to speak to some construction workers near her house. She told him that she wanted to do this so that they could fix the window that he had broken, spinning the situation like this would be helpful to him because it would hide what he had done. When Marchetti allowed her to do this, she immediately told the workers she needed help, and they called 911. Unfortunately, even at this point, the nightmare wasn't over because Marchetti hadn't allowed Allie to take Jackson with her. When police arrived at the residence around 11:30 a.m., they were able to storm inside and rescue the infant, though not before Marchetti allegedly shot him several times. The boy was rushed to a hospital, and amazingly, he is expected to survive. In the meantime, Marchetti reportedly barricaded himself inside the house. For the next few hours, members of the SWAT team attempted to negotiate with him, though around 3 p.m. the 51-year-old allegedly set the house on fire. Due to the ongoing sounds of gunfire from inside, it was some time before firefighters could actually move in and extinguish the blaze. When they did, Marchetti was found dead inside from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The residence, which is said to have been Allie's childhood home, was almost completely destroyed. While the crime has understandably been devastating for Allie and her family, police commended her on her quick thinking, saying that she was the reason that her and her son ultimately survived the terrifying situation. At the time of this recording, it has been reported that baby Jackson has undergone 3 successful surgeries and is recovering well from his injuries. Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you'd consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.